This is week 9 of our Valentine, and this week we make the corner squares, which are some pretty little heart blocks. You'll need to make 4 of those, and I'm going to show you how to trim your sections ready to join together in next week's lesson. So it can be very daunting when it comes time to trimming these applique sections or blocks that we've put so much work into. So I thought that it's best to make some templates first of all. So to make some templates, you can use either tissue paper. Sometimes tissue paper isn't big enough, so you'd have to tape it together, or use some interfacing. So I've just used a lightweight sew-in interfacing, and that was readily available from my local haberdashery store. So I purchased about 1.5 meters or 1.5 yards, and then I cut my templates from that. So to cut my templates, I just first of all treated the interfacing just like I would a normal patchwork fabric. So I folded it over and like lengthwise, and then I trimmed a straight edge. Then on the interfacing, there's always one really nice straight edge, so I use that edge to cut my long border strip. Now I'm not going to talk sizes in this video because it can get a little bit confusing, so all of the sizes are in the course notes. So you basically need a long strip for the borders and then a large center square. You need the medium-sized squares. I then cut small corner squares, and I didn't cut the rectangles yet because I just used the large center square. So once I had finished cutting out my center square, I then just remeasured and made my rectangle. So when it's time to cut out, make sure with those pieces that you mark the center line. So measure that up so every piece, every template has a center line. And then when you go to cut your pieces, just give them all a press. So when you press them, use an applique mat on top and just make sure all the pieces are nice and smooth. And the reason why I recommend using an applique mat is because one time I was trimming something and I gave it a press and I used a polyester thread and it melted under the iron. So I just want everybody to be aware of that. Be very careful with the threads. So test it before you press, or you may even want to press from the back. So once all my pieces were nice and smooth, it was then just a matter of taking my template, and I've got my center lines, and in the course notes, if you remember, every time I said to, once you trace your design out, I said make a little mark at the creases on the side edges of the block. So this was done to help us center when we are going to be cutting out with our templates. Now, if you forgot to make that mark, that's okay, because you're probably going to be able to still see those center creases. So just make some marks there with your pencil or fabric marker. Then all you have to do is just place your template on top, align the center lines of your template with those little marks on the side edges, and pin it in place. And double check everything, double check the measurements before you go and cut. You know what they say, measure twice, cut once. And then I pinned it on using some flower head pins. So the flower head pins are nice and flat, and that just means that when you put the ruler on top, it's going to sit nice and flat, rather than when you use like a round head pin, the ruler's not going to sit flat. So it's just a matter of trimming around the edge. So go ahead and then trim all of your squares in the same way. Center square, you just do exactly in the same way. The rectangles the same way, the small corner squares the same way. The only thing I want you to do with the border strips is to place your template on and trim the width, but don't trim the length at this point in time. And the reason for that is that when we join the quilt together, and great news with this quilt, we actually have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. But sometimes if somebody's seam is a little bit more or a little bit less, it means that those border strips are going to be a different length. So I just want you to leave the length until we go to join those onto the quilt. Now, if you were part of our island home quilt, or you've seen some of my other videos about joining with the 1 to 3 method or the no sashing method, when you are joining patchwork blocks together, you're really kind of bound to that 1/4 inch seam, and so we like to have that extra fabric to fold over at the back. But with this, because it's an applique quilt, we can take whatever seam allowance that we like. So we're going to take a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once we sew the pieces together on the top, that's then going to give us plenty of fabric to fold over on the back, and you're going to have the option to either machine sew it down or hand sew it down. So that's pretty much all you need to do for this lesson, is make your 4 small corner hearts, blocks, squares, whatever they are, and trim the pieces ready to join together for next week. Now, if there's anything you didn't understand in the video, don't worry, because it's all in the course notes. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you next week. It's going to be a big one when we're joining the whole quilt together. Thanks for watching. Bye.